Come check out the Connection Games and Comics. We have the largest selection of War Machine and Hordes miniatures in the Lower Mainland. War Machine Wednesdays and Sundays, with tables and terrain to play your game.
Okay, welcome to Wargamers Shut and Paint. I'm going to show you how to make cheap, scenic bases that are going to improve the quality of your armies in general. And they're super easy to do. They take very little effort, so that's the big kind of selling feature for them. So what you need here to do this is you need your ballast mix. This is just the cast-offs that I've acquired over doing various terrain projects. You've seen those videos probably, so all of our how to build stuff. This is the excess stuff from those. We've got some air dry clay. We've got our base, and in this case we've got a model that we want to base. Now, most of the time you can actually create a scenic base with little thought to how you're going to position the model on it. Assuming you leave it enough surface area that most models will be able to fit. In this case, because she has something on her base, and we're not going to take that out, we're actually going to leave it there because it's fairly sturdy. We want to keep her in mind when we're making this base. So, this stuff you can pick up in a pretty big tub. It's over 1 kilogram in weight. I think I paid $10 for it. It's super cheap, so that's pretty good. So we take our base, we take some of this clay, just enough that you can cover the inside of the base, and this is really more preference. Some people like to have this stuff stay exactly within the insides and have nothing around the lip. Some people want to have some of the ground texture overflow onto the lip of the base, which gives it a little bit more of a natural feel. For me, I'm kind of doing it halfway. So we've got, it's a little bit over the base, but not by a lot. So basically we just mash that in there, take our model, position it however we're going to want the model to sit, and we're going to just press this down a bit so that we know that she's going to sit there, and it's going to work out okay. We're going to take her off. We've got our indent of where the model is going to sit. And I'm going to use some talus. Now you can use anything for this. You can use any kind of larger rocks or basing material or anything like that, but I'm just going to use one little rock, and I want to place it somewhere she's not going to be. So about there. And it does stick out of the base fairly significantly, but that's okay. So if we place her back on the base, that spot, kind of mash these around a little bit, and that's it for this part. So this is obviously not the same base, but it is one that I was working on previously. This is dry. Now this clay takes about 24 hours to dry, so this is why we're kind of accelerating the process here. We're going to take some super glue. It doesn't really matter what super glue you use. And you'll notice that that the actual clay part pops off of the base. It's not stuck to it in any real way. So we're actually just going to glue it down. I'm not being super precise, it's just enough. Now, if you're using a slotted base, you should be familiar that one side is shorter than the other. So you want to make sure that this is keyed properly. But there we go. And also, I like to put roughly a drop of glue into the crevices between the clay and each of the rocks, because that'll adhere the rocks there. And that's it for this step. So now we just wait for this to dry. What we're going to do at this point is we're going to basically cover the top with glue, leaving the talus, whatever you want to call it, and we're going to apply our ballast mix. And you just mix up some white glue, PVA, tacky glue, mix it up with some water, and take a brush that's not very important to you, and start applying it. So, trying to be careful not to get it too much on the rocks, because any glue that we get on the rocks will the flocking is going to adhere to. Now, not the flocking, the ballast. But sometimes it is difficult, and if there ends up being any rocks where you don't want them, you can always pull them off prior to the glue completely setting. and I like to make sure that the rim is relatively unexposed, I like to make sure that the rim of the base is relatively exposed. So I make sure that I just kind of wipe off some of the excess glue. Now this won't prevent our ballast from sticking to it completely, but what it will do is it'll make it so that any ballast that does stick to it will be easy to pull off afterwards. So we take our mix, and you kind of want to have more, if you have a choice, you can kind of want to have more fine ballast than you do coarse ballast in here, but it doesn't really matter. We just take it and we basically just mash it into the ballast. Now normally when I'm doing a large amount of these bases, I stick these to paint pots or something using like blue tack, or poster tack, whatever you want to call it. This is normally what I'd use, as you can see. But for the sake of this demo, it's not that important. This is just a single base. And that's it for this step. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait till this glue dries, and then we're going to prime this black. And it is important that you prime it black. So the next ones I bring out here should be completely primed black and dry. For this part, we are going to paint our base. And it's a very simple process to paint these bases, but you're going to need a brown, preferably a darker brown or a mid-tone brown, a white, and a black. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to dry brush all of the areas except for the obvious rock brown. So put some brown onto our palette. I'm going to use a larger dry brush for this part. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with dry brushing, it's basically just taking some paint, wiping off most of it onto a paper towel, and then dragging what remains, the drier paint, across the surface of across the surface of a model that has raised edges to pick out those highlights. For the brown part, we want to do kind of a heavier dry brush, because we want it to look like brown ground. And if any flocking parts fall off, this is a fine time for that to happen. You want to try and avoid getting the rock if you can. If it can stay black, that's ideal, but sometimes it's not always possible. So that's basically it for that part. What we're going to do is we're then going to take some of our white. We're going to mix it in with our brown. And this is going to be our second dry brush of the ground. So it's our highlight layer. Mix this together. It should give us kind of a cream or a light brown color, depending on how much white you use. We don't actually need this much paint, but presumably you're going to be doing more than one base at a time. I did the whole army's bases all at once for this project, and it didn't take that long. So for this step, you do want to make sure that you don't have very much paint on the brush in general. And then same thing, you just kind of dust the top. This probably could have been actually a little bit more, a little darker even. That would have been fine, but this isn't too bad. Gives us some variation in the brown. And don't worry about getting paint on the rim too much at this stage. So there we go. We're then going to take our black, kind of over here, and mix it with our white. And obviously this will give us kind of a dark gray color. Actually, this is probably closer to a mid-tone gray. Starting with a mid or a dark gray is fine. You don't want to start with a bright gray, though. And that's because we're going to do 2 layers of this dry brush on just the rock. It's probably not dry enough. Just get the rock. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit more white and add it into our gray mix. It's actually probably quite a bit of white, but the exact mix isn't super important because, I mean, you're going to have different variations in colors. You could do browns. If you do browns, though, I would recommend doing a darker ground texture and a much lighter rock texture because you really want to be able to tell the difference between them. And that can be difficult if you're using browns and basically all browns. So I like to use a gray rock if I can, and that just breaks up the little tiny terrain piece a little bit. So this gives a much lighter gray. Still kind of a mid-tone gray actually, but that's okay. And just a little dry brush, just that part of the base. And that's basically it for that part. Now, one thing you could do is you could paint the rim again, but we're going to do that at a later stage specifically for arcade ore models. But at this point, the base is actually ready for our flock mix. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take our turf mix, our turf blend, from our turf blend tutorial, put a little bit aside into like a baggie like this, and we're actually going to mix in a whole bunch of extra static grass. And the reason why we're going to do that is because the static grass is going to make these bases pop a little bit compared to our terrain pieces. And because they're so small, you do kind of want a little bit more variation. Also, the turf is kind of large. They have kind of large pieces for this kind of thing. So we're actually going to put a whole whack load of this in. Well, maybe not that much, but a whole bunch in. And again, this is a step that you only really do once, and you'll be able to make untold amounts of bases with. And I'm also going to mix in the burnt grass because I don't want it to be that bright. I still want it to kind of fit in with the terrain I've created. I'm going to put a healthy amount in there. That's fine. I'm going to seal up our bag, and we're going to shake it up quite a bit, although I just got some paint on the bag, so I'm going to wipe that off. Okay, so this is mixed up fairly well, and it didn't change the overall color too much, so that's ideal for what we're doing here. Okay, so from here, we take our water and glue mix, as I've gone over in many videos, but this actually probably used a little more water. Still very much a paste, but should let us work with it a little bit better. And for this step, we want to put glue on the base, but we want to keep in mind a couple of things. We want to cover a good portion of the surface, leaving enough space for a model's feet and leaving enough space for anything else that we want to adhere. We also want to make sure that there is some ground texture still showing through, so you want to leave extra space anyway. So on this one, I'm going to put some over here. I'm going to leave most of that up there fine, or alone. put some down here. Somewhere there. And I think I'm okay with that. It's not a precise science. So again, we've got some on that side, some on that side. We've left the rock more or less alone, and we've left a good portion of ground texture up top more or less alone. Then we're going to basically, we're going to take a paper towel. You could put the base inside of the bag, but I prefer to do it this way. It's a little less messy and a little bit easier to manage, I feel. And then we're just going to take our new ground mix. We're going to sprinkle it on top. Making sure that you don't get to see much, if any, glue remaining. Okay, so that's not too bad. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now on this piece specifically, there is a big block of space that's been left open. And the reason why that is because we're going to do something a little special with this base in particular. So we're just going to take this excess and dump it back into our bag. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to take just some of our turf, not the blended turf, I'm going to take the darker turf, so we've got some coarse turf here. I'm going to pour a little onto here. It's more than enough. And we're going to apply some glue in just this little area there. And this glue, you do want it to be fairly thick. There we go. So we've got our glue in there, and we want to put our coarse turf just in there. And this is going to sort of give us like a small bit of moss. It's going to break up the colors on the base, and it's going to add a little bit extra oomph to our base to show that it's not just flock on ground. This kind of step isn't necessary, and in a lot of bases I won't do it, but I feel like by doing this kind of thing, at least on some of them, you really give a more organic feel to your bases. So there we go. Now our base is complete. I would paint the whole rim of the base black, and then what I would do is I'm going to paint half of it red for my Khador. Now, that's going to depend heavily on which army you're using, but that's basically it. So what I'll do, this is our army painted Khador Winter Guard model. He's not super special, he is a grunt, but this is the kind of base we're going to give him. Now I'm going to basically cut him off of this base because he was glued down, and for our purposes you really don't want to glue these guys in, but bear with me. So for this model it was very difficult. I decided I would just cut the base right off. Okay, so I finally got him off the base. I was a little rough with the feet, so that was kind of unfortunate, but that's okay. You can always go back up and touch up his feet if we need to. So I'm now just going to super glue him to the base. And this is why we left excess space open. So you don't want to glue him to the actual flocking bits. You want to glue him to the rocks if you can. So you find kind of what you think is a natural pose for him. Take your super glue, and you glue him. I also don't tend to paint the rims of the base until after I've glued the model to the base, because that way I know what I'm dealing with. I know which way he's supposed to be facing, I know how he's going to look overall, and I can be more assured of how I'm going to be going about that. It is important that you go back and paint the rim of the base black with your line markers at the very least. If you want to do something more fancy than that, you'll improve the model, I'm sure, but that's kind of the bare minimum. I would paint it black for sure. Okay, so now he's glued to the base. We can pick him up and take a look. So that's basically him. Again, he's a very simple army painted guy. It's the fastest way you could probably do an army, but it still looks decent, and it looks the base really adds to the model's overall impressiveness, I think. So I really encourage people to do something with the bases at the very least. The more you do with the bases, the better off you are, I feel. Doing something like this doesn't take very much time, and it is considerably more scenic than what I've seen played in most cases. So yeah, give it a try. Please like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think. I'd like to open up a dialogue here. I'd like to know what you guys think. Maybe give me some suggestions or things you'd like to see. Right now the plan is to basically do all of our bases like this for basically all of the armies, because I really like the way it looks, and it's going to represent well on the tabletop. So if you have any other ideas, give me a shout. Thanks for watching.